Rosie's always at the beach.
I know, she's always on vacation. Every time I
Why
see her,
not? Why not?
she's on vacation. I love it. All right, just want to make sure on the agents that are on Zoom, can you see the purchase agreement?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, if you have any questions, by all means, please put it on the chat or raise your hand and we'll try to address it accordingly, okay? So this is going to be a rapid fire class. I only have 1 hour of time with we're going to go over the basic fundamentals of the new purchase agreement. It's pretty self-explanatory. I wish I had Nat here with me to help me like she does at the team meeting, but I'm going to do my very best to try to navigate it with all of you. So happy Friday. Happy August, what is it today? August 9th already. Yeah. So big changes happening next week, right? Tuesday. August 13 is when the MLS. And thank you for the ones that jumped on this morning's producer's mindset to kind of just go over the week changes with CRMLS happening. You know, thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Brandon. Always valuable information coming from some amazing agents, you know, that really just corral and understand we're all in it together, right? At the end of the day, you know, and there's a lot of questions, a lot of moving parts. But rest assured, we're going to get through this just like we did in 2020 with COVID. So today's topic is going to dive into the California residential. Okay, so just the residential purchase agreement. Make sure that you're using the most current revised form, which is July 2024. And again, not too many changes with the purchase agreement. Big changes on the listing agreement, right? They implemented, they added the grid to it as well. So again, date of preparation, that's the date when you start the actual preparation of the form. The buyers, you're going to put in the buyers. If it's 1 buyer, 2 buyers, 3 buyers, you want to put all of the buyers that are going to be on title and also possibly on the loan. You want to make sure that their information is on there. The property is the property in question, the property that they are going to be submitting an offer, okay? Make sure, and I've seen this happen, that they submit an offer, but they have the wrong address because they submitted an offer on the previous. They just changed some things, price, but forgot to change the address, right? Doesn't look right on you when you get an offer as a listing agent and you have that information incorrect. So make sure you're covering all bases and watching every component before you get it actually DocuSign or sign. Go through the forms and make sure that everything is in alignment of the address and the APN number as well. Okay. So the first part, A1 or 1A and 1B, pretty self-explanatory. Part 2 goes into the agency, right? Agency, the agreements between, you know, the listing agent and the buyer's agent. This is where you're going to put the confirmation of seller's brokerage. Okay, that means the listing agent's information, if it's different or separate from your office, right? It could be within the same office, or it could be a separate brokerage as well. You're going to put in the information here, right? You do want to check if it is the seller or if it's a dual agency, right? So you would click here, this, and I use this as an example. Again, it can be whatever listing this particular brokerage has. You're going to put the brokerage name and then the name of the agent. All of this information is public information. You can pull it from the MLS as well. And there's ways of doing it. You can click where it merges even the seller's information and its information as well. Okay. Please make sure to
regular plug-in headphones.
unmute. Let me just do it myself here. So otherwise, yeah.
This is dual agency though.
Correct. All right, and then for the buyer, you would check, buyer's information. Okay, and then you would submit the purchase agreement and including your information. Okay, again, this is just for illustration purposes, right? Make sure that the license is the corporate license of the company, and then it's your personal license number, and also the listing agent if you have that. If you don't have that information, it's perfectly fine to leave it blank. The more you add, the cleaner it looks. But if you don't have that information, you can call and ask, hey, where can I find your information, right?
Do you mark that dual agent box too, since you're representing both sides?
Well, I want to, it just, let
I
me,
know, but
let me just add a different one, okay? Does that help? Maybe that'll put some clarity, okay? Better?
yes.
Okay. All right, so again, I'm using this as a illustration, as a sample, folks, okay? But we got Farah who's like, wait a minute, is this considered a dual agent offer? It technically it would be, so, but not. All right, so section 3 goes into the terms of the purchase and allocation cost. This is again all of the grid information, right? The information is the purchase price. What is the offer you're going to be submitting, right? I use $1 million as an example. Close of escrow, the time of close of escrow, right? This is where you need to be in communications with the lender. It says, hey, how fast can you get this deal closed if we get an offer accepted, right? Typically, normal time frame is 30 days. Now, that can be adjusted, right? Depending on the circumstances, right? What if the lender can close sooner than that, right? Well, it's all about conversation and getting a better understanding, because there may be a delay as well, and that delay may be more than 30 days. But for the sake of today's class, I just use 30 days as an example. Can you modify this if you need extra time? Yeah, that's the beauty of negotiations, right? If the seller or the buyer need to extend the time, right, you can leave it at 30 days, and then once you're in escrow, you may ask for an extension of time to close, right? Just no difference in an extension to release a specific contingency, right? That's where you're going to put that information. Section 3C goes into the expiration. Okay, this is the expiration of the offer, right? It's already at default 3 calendar days. Okay, it doesn't say business days, it says 3 calendar days. So I want to emphasize and I want to stress the importance is this is not a contingency where if it falls on the weekend or a holiday, it reverts to the next calendar day. It's 3 calendar days. So if it happens to be on a Saturday or Sunday or holiday, this offer would be considered void. Does that make sense? Any questions regarding that? Okay. You can also do some modifications. You can add or take away. You can put a specific date if you want, or even push that time from 5 p.m. You can say instead of 5 p.m., I want to do an 8 o'clock or a 9 o'clock time frame, right? As an example, right? I try to keep it as very to the agreement. So I think 3 calendar days is more than enough. But if your clients are pressed to get an answer because they may be in negotiations with other offers, you may want to tighten up that 3 days to maybe 2 days as an example, right? Or maybe the seller went on vacation and you want to continue with this and you know that 3 days is not suffice or not enough time, you may also extend the expiration date to a later time as well. Any questions? Okay. Initial deposit, that's the what we call the good faith amount that the buyers will put in good faith to tie up the property, right? That is all negotiable, all right? Standard practice, most agents use 3%. Why do you think agents use 3% in your opinion?
They were told.
They were told, yeah. Just like we were told 3% for concessions or commissions, right? Yeah, it's embedded that they believe that 3% is the amount. And the answer is it's negotiable, right? I've seen $1,000 of initial deposit being accepted by the seller. I've seen $500 as initial deposit. It all depends if the seller is willing to accept it at the end of the day. So try to remember that the 3% is just what people believe it is, and it's part of negotiations. Now, I can say I'm going to throw a $500 deposit, but a savvy listing agent, right, will probably counter that and ask to put higher of a deposit, right? That's part of the agreement, right? And the whole purpose is because of what we call liquidated damage, right? If the buyer defaults or cancels and the buyer released any and all contingencies and held the property for 20 days, the buyer's in breach of contract, right? There should be some, what do you call it? What was it going to use? Some consequences to that. The seller may be able to go up to 3%, right? And it's up to. It doesn't automatically mean 3%, $30,000 is going to go to the seller, because a very savvy buyer will say, well, tell me what damages, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, did you really incur on me tying the property for 20 days? And that could be the position where it may not be 30,000 releasing to the seller. It could be maybe $10,000, and it could be back and forth, right? Because at the end of a cancellation of escrow, depending on who retains that deposit, if the buyer retains the deposit, if the seller retains the deposit, or they mutually agree to some terms, that's on them, right? If you're the listing agent, you want to try to take care of your client's best interest. You're going to try to fight for what's right? But at the end, it's not your decision. It's what the seller dictates and what the buyer dictates. And I've seen scenarios too, folks, where the buyer breaches the contract, sends cancellation, releasing the money to the seller, and then the buyer within 24 hours decides, change their mind, I don't want to release. And then escrow is kind of on a standby. And I've seen where that has happened, where you think, well, they're the rights, right? And then the money now is held in escrow for a week or 2 weeks. And this particular scenario happened with one of our agents in our office. And guess what? The buyer was able to retain most of their deposit after releasing any and all contingency, physical inspection, seller disclosures, appraisal, loan contingency, and also the cancellation saying give the money to the seller. Okay, it happens. But until we get mutual agreement, escrow needs to get that confirmation. Escrow is not going to release the money just because it states on the agreement it has to be mutually agreed by all parties. And this is the reason escrow doubles and confirms that not just your cancellation, but they also want your clients to sign their cancellation just for confirmation purposes. All right, I use D2 as an example, right? Increased deposit, money placed into escrow after the initial deposit. Okay, so this is in addition of the actual initial deposit, right? This is telling the seller, hey, in good faith to make your offer strong, you may incentivize and says, look, I'm a strong buyer, right? And if you accept our offers, I will include an additional $10,000, okay, into escrow, and you can put a specific date that you'll add, or use it upon a specific contingency that you want to add, right? Now, it's not common practice. It's not we see increase, but let's say that the buyer may not have the means right now, but is waiting on a sale of their home. Okay, circumstances.
I've been waiting for my envelope. Thank you.
And she spoke to you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm happy with the
I like it.
I go to,
Well,
yes, You gotta go to your gallery. Or go to more.
There has to be an easier way to do this. There we go.
There you go.
Okay.
Alright.
Please make sure on Zoom if you need to step out, please make sure to mute yourself. Okay,
The other, just for the increased deposit where we use it very frequently is on short sales.
on short sales.
So here's 5,000 now, Simon. When you seller gets short sale approval, I'll put in the difference.
And income properties that are
Income.
tenant occupied,
10 out of 5
they'll put
vacancy.
a certain percentage down until they can see it because the offer's accepted contingent on seeing the property.
Yeah.
That's right. Good point. Very good point. Yeah. I've seen it where the seller may not have the money. They have the asset, they're in escrow on their property that they're selling. And once they close on that, right, they need the seller's proceeds in order to qualify or even put a cash deal together, right? And they'll use some of the concessions from that as an increase. They may put a small initial deposit and then they'll put a larger increase because that deal is closing in 2 weeks, even though you may be on a 30-day escrow. They said in 2 weeks, we'll put the additional, it can be flipped. Meaning I'll put 10,000 now, and then in 2 weeks, I'll put the additional 30,000 for a $40,000 deposit, as an example.
I should be getting my tax return money soon.
Yeah, that's a better one,
That's
yeah.
another one.
Or a settlement, maybe they want this property and they're getting a settlement and are waiting in a couple weeks to get their money, so that may be the reason you want to increase the deposit. All right, next section under E1 goes into the loan amount. Okay, I want to stress and I want to emphasize that the loan amount is subtracting the actual down payment that you're putting. Okay, so for example, I used $1 million purchase price, but I put that they're financing 500,000. So that means that the buyer is putting 50% down. Okay, that's the correct way to do it because the top number and the bottom number need to match. And I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so if the offer is $1 million and they're putting 50% down, this is the amount that they need to come in. Okay, 460. Now, Simon, how did you get the 460? Well, the initial deposit of 30,000 plus the increase amount of 10,000 on August 16, that is already included as part of their down payment. This is the amount that the buyer will have to come in to escrow to make this deal work. Any questions? Pretty
Thank goodness
simple.
it does.
Plus
math.
closing costs.
Exactly. And that does not include the closing costs. This is just, thank you, Rosie. Just the purchase price and the loan amount. Now, you can probably, work, but it's going to be too confusing. Keep it very clean. Okay. The lender will be talking, if any, with the listing agent, if they want very specific numbers. But yes, this does not include the closing cost. This closing cost would be, in excess of, 2% or more. Okay, this is just the offer, the down payment, and what the buyer would have to come in to make this deal work.
At what point does a down payment actually get submitted?
Okay, that's a very good question. So as we get closer to closing, the lender has already got all of the conditions met and they're ready to start loan docs. That's when it usually starts, right after loan docs. That's when the escrow will calculate the figures and then say, this is what the estimate that the buyer would have to come in to wire the money into escrow, usually at the very end of closing. Okay. Any other questions?
So that's typical 30-day escrow, about 3 weeks in.
Pretty much, yeah.
But it's before actual closing.
Oh, yeah, you're not gonna be able to close without the, that's a condition.
The down payment. is what
That'll
she's
be
talking
part
about.
of the required to bring in prior to close. they'll take whatever the balance of the down payment is plus closing costs, that's the escrow company giving a settlement sheet to a buyer. On what they need to bring in total.
It's about a week before closing.
Yeah.
About a week. Well, the initial down payment though, that's due to like, yeah, we don't move the property into pending until they paid the initial down.
Right. Let me answer some of the questions. So Steve says, remember, if there's an increase in deposit form, DID needs to be signed by buyer and seller to incorporate the additional amount, 100%. Steve, if you're still on the call, do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that, please? Maybe.
I am here, yes.
Okay.
Right, what takes place is anytime there is an increased deposit from the buyer that was originally increased from the amount that was written in the original offer, in order to have that additional amount be part of the liquidated damages clause, excuse me, you need to have Form DID signed both by buyer and seller. If not, you're going to find yourself in a very unfortunate position that buyer will say, hey, I didn't sign that form. The seller is only entitled to that original amount that was written in the original offer. So one of the things that I know I do in my counter offers is anytime there is an increased deposit, I make it part of the condition of the counter offer that within 2 business days or within 2 days after the buyer submitting or wiring their funds into the escrow company of those additional funds, Form DID, and DID stands for delivery of increased deposit, okay, must be signed by the buyer. So then you could have your seller sign it. I'm speaking as the listing agent. If not, those additional funds will not be incorporated into liquidated damages.
That's right. Thank you, Steve. Emilio, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Simon. I'm not sure if you covered this already, but on line item E1, 5C1 under loan amounts, where it says interest rate, what do you recommend us putting on the not to exceed percentage there? Is there something that you put in there or with fluctuating rate right now?
Yeah, so good question, Emilio. So it does have, and it does incorporate if there is additional information on a fixed rate or adjustable. So if they have a fixed rate, it's already embedded into the agreement. If it's an adjustable type of loan, then you would initial or check off the initial adjustable rate. The not to exceed is that it's a negotiation, but it's also a way that the buyer may be able to back out of the deal. It's in your client's discretion if you want to leave it blank or if you want to put a specific percentage. So what it says is that if the rates happen to fluctuate, right, and you put a percentage, and let's say that percentage is 7.25, right? And you're in escrow, and now something happens where drastically the interest rates exceed, and the buyer rate is put here at 7% or 7.25. The buyer can use that as a tool to back out because the rate exceeded what they were comfortable up to. Because the higher the interest rate, the higher is their mortgage payment, right? So you can use that as a segue, and don't put 1%. Okay, don't put 1% because a good listing agent it's gonna counter that as part of the process, right? But that's just explaining, look, I'm willing to buy this property. Here's my offer and my terms and condition. But if this loan exceeds that percentage that I have here, then I have a way to back out of the deal.
I would say let the buyer's lender guide them on what they should do.
100%. Yeah. But also, if you leave it blank, If you leave it blank, then it doesn't really matter what the rate is, because if it's 10% rate, you left it blank, you cannot use that as an excuse, technically speaking. Does that make sense?
So what
So
if you
depending on the
put like
scenario.
2% above the rate that they were working with?
Yeah, you can put that as additional terms, but that's why you'll put a specific percentage here. The second part is talks about the buyer to pay up to, those are the points, right? Especially if you're getting hard money. It could be in excess of 1.5 to 2 points. Okay. So that may be a way that the buyer may be able to back out of the deal if that amount exceeds that, right? I hope that kind of answers your question, Amelia.
Excuse me, if you have a buyer that probably qualify, let's say the interest rates are 7 right now, but if the interest rates go to 8, he does not qualify. So you agree, you are going to advise the buyer to put that 8% because he will not be able to qualify for more than 8%.
That is correct, yeah. So whatever you put there, anything over that exceeds their offer. Therefore, they can use that as a way to back out of the deal because they are not comfortable with the monthly payments on it.
Can you negotiate that and ask the buyer's agent not to put anything there? To accept the offer? In order for you to accept the
Most offers, and I'm gonna talk to most of the listing agents in here. Do you see that they typically put a interest amount? Nope.
Only if they're tight.
Yeah.
If they're a good buyer's agent, they do.
Yeah.
A lot of them just don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that aren't in class today.
Yeah. Right? Shame on those agents, right? So yeah, most offers, it's always blank. But leaving it blank also can be a disadvantage too, because can I use that if rates go up? I can't afford it because of the rate. Well, you didn't stipulate it on the offer. A good savvy listing agent may use that as a position. There's a lot of moving parts, folks, okay? Remember, nothing is always set in stone, especially even though the purchase agreement is in black and white, everything is subject to change and be modified, right? They can use other ways to back out of the deal, right? Not just one, but there's other ways to do so. All right, let's go ahead and continue. If it's an FHA, it's 17 days of deliver list of lender requirement repairs, right? So that can also be modified. Additional finance, that's section E2 that goes into like a seller financing, right? Seller is willing to carry a note, then you'll put the additional. This was back in the early 2000s where lenders were probably doing
Countrywide, maybe, let's go countrywide.
Yeah, Countrywide is a big advocate of 100% financing, right? So they would do, first deed of trust for 80% and a second deed of trust for 20%. And the first interest rate was this, and then the second was a little higher interest rate, right? So that's that language is in there for those purposes, right? And it's already conventional, or if check, seller finance, or any other type of agreement. Section E goes into the occupancy type, right? It's already said that it's a primary, right? But if it's not primary, then you either check secondary or investment, okay? I caution you, okay? And this is more your government loans, your FHA, and your VA. If you know that your client is not intending to live as their primary and are telling you, be very careful. I've seen in our office where the mortgage company will send out a letter from their attorneys to the owner stipulating that, hey, we have you as a primary, but we saw, and they have resources to find this. They have access to all of the platforms we have. If they see that the property is being rented, that's a red flag. And they can call the note. Okay, and it could be a federal offense too, if they're defrauding, okay, so please make sure, do the right thing, right? Don't know, I don't wanna know, you know? But that's between the buyer and also the lender, but if it is primary, then leave it alone. If it's a secondary, okay, and what's considered a secondary? Yeah, like a vacation home, right? Yeah, if it's an investment, because all of these, the rates are different from your primary. Any second home or primary is a different rate in terms, yeah. Okay. And then F goes into the balance of down, and then this number and the offer should be the same, okay? Buyer will initial, if accepted, the seller will initial these terms, okay? That's the whole purpose, that they put these initials in each and every page, that both parties agree to these terms, okay? If there's not an agreement, this is why we have counteroffers, seller multiple counteroffers, buyer counteroffers. And then once everyone is in agreement, that's when we go through the process of opening escrow, and then escrow will draft their escrow instructions. Jimmy?
Yeah, on the secondary, do you think it would be acceptable to rent it on a short notice also?
As a secondary, rented.
So if you're if you're treating it as a secondary purchase, is it okay to rent it?
I think it's okay. If you can't be in two places.
For
At one time.
vacation home, you use it partially anyway.
Nothing's illegal until you're caught. That's my rule of thumb. That's my rule of thumb, so.
We're gonna mute that part. Recording is gonna be removed. All right, so let's
Sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry.
all right. All right, section G1 goes into seller credit, if any, all right? This is again, if the buyer is asking the seller for some type of concessions. It's on here, folks, okay? And it says a percentage or a flat fee, right? Percentage number above is for calculations purposes. So the funny thing is, correct me if I'm wrong, but you cannot put a percentage until you put a flat fee first. It works the opposite. So you have to put, so I'll give you an example. You cannot put a percentage, you know, let's see. It doesn't allow you to put a percentage, but it allows you to put, you know, 11,000 or 10,000, let's just say.
It's gonna be a mistake, right?
And then now it adds the percentage. So
How about if you don't check the box first and maybe?
if you don't check the box, it doesn't allow you to put anything. Yeah, so you have to check this, but it works backwards. You don't necessarily put a percentage because you know, let's the real talk, right? The lender says, look, ask for 2%, ask for 2.5%, ask for 1%. Okay, so you're scrambling, okay. But if the system doesn't allow it, you just gotta reverse engineer it, right? Does that make sense? Joanna?
Logic I can see behind that is that, so if you put in your offer and then, if you put in a percentage and then all of a sudden the price, you know, you offer another 50,000, then the seller's having to give more credit than they thought, but if I put in a dollar amount, they have to set dollar amount.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate, because it doesn't allow you to put one or the other. You put a flat fee, it calculates that, but you cannot modify it only if you go to this section here. Seller credit to be applied for closing costs or, right? But here, you have a good point. You have a very good point, because this is embedded that it's $10,000 that we're asking the seller. Let me try to see if I remove it,
It's not taking into consideration.
but it's gonna remove the 1%. See? Yeah, so it's something I think, in my personal opinion, that CR needs to correct.
Yeah.
Just my thought, okay? Jim?
But does this contract include a house? House an ADU?
Yeah, this is an offer, single family up to 4 units, you can use this. Now, anything over a single, and even in ADU, I would probably, recommend that you use the RIPA. Form, the residential income purchase agreement. Because it has language in there about tenants and possessions and all that fun stuff. But this form can be used and intertwined with duplex, triplex, and even fourplex as well. Yes.
Before you use the RIPA form, does it have to be a legitimate, like ADU with a separate address or
No,
not necessarily?
no, it doesn't. It can be, all of the utilities can still be attached to the main house. But it's a separate dwelling that they're gonna use it for rental income. Yeah, you can
I think the
use
key
the
word
RIPA.
is, key word is if it's a legal ADU.
But any
I mean,
properties, right?
Because if it's a legal ADU, it has a separate address. If it's not permitted, they just call it an ADU. It's just like it's like a enclosed patio. It's not necessarily part of the square footage is the problem if it's
Right.
not permitted.
Yeah, and you gotta be careful because the
So-
lender may not approve that loan too, if it's not a legal. So yeah, to your point, Brandon, it's a shot, yeah, you're right. So. Good question. We have another, yeah,
Going back to, sorry, the down payment up there, you had hard money. So the differential between,
He's trying to see who's paying attention. Way to go.
yeah,
Yeah, I like how he spelled it too, because we use ehardmoney.com. My bad.
so
so.
See if anybody else is paying attention. I'm just seeing if anybody else.
I just use it as an example. You know, because here's the reason behind my madness, okay? And this is just me with my broker compliance mindset. When an offer gets submitted and it's technically cash offer. Okay? Yeah, technically. My opinion, when someone makes an offer of cash, I'm thinking, show me the entire money that you have. So if I'm making an offer for $1 million, I want to see proof of funds in your bank account that has over $1 million, right? Because there's closing costs as well, right? So that's showing me confirmation that that is a legitimate cash offer. But in the minds of a lot of agents, okay, and I know I'm going to probably get some people disagree with me. They'll put cash offer, right? When it's technically not a cash offer, they think because they put hard money, that's not cash. There's still some type of loan process. They still got to run your credit, okay? It's a different type of money. It's not your traditional, and it cuts a lot of red tape, but it's still finance. You're still going to make mortgage payments on it.
They're still underwriting.
And there's still conditions on that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So in essence, a savvy listing agent, I'm gonna dissect it. Okay, is it a true cash offer? Or is it not a true cash offer, but they're using hard money? Well, it's the same thing. It's not the same thing, folks. It's not.
Or they're
Because the lender who's hard money can decline the loan. I've seen it. So if it is a true cash, then put true. If not, be transparent about it, okay?
But the buyers don't tell you the truth, that's the problem. When
This
you-
is why you need to ask a lot of questions. You gotta be that detective type of mentality. Ask questions so that way you're crystal clear, because your approach is to negotiate with the listing agent. And if you have a Michelle Brown or a Brandon as the listing agent, they're gonna dissect it for you, and then you're gonna look like, oh, I don't know. You know, this is why you really need to educate yourself. Makes sense? Yeah, good point. Good point. So that's why. So I'm sorry, what was your question?
If it's hard money.
if it's hard money, and so I guess it works as well as my down payment.
Well,
Initial
and here it is, right? If I go here and put cash. All right, it doesn't allow me to put any check things here anymore. So even if I go here, let's say put other and I put hard money, right? Oops, did I spell it right? I'm curious to see that if I click here, does it remove that? See? So it's there for that purpose because cash is cash. Okay. But it also has the option, so full transparency, because yeah, when you go cash, you're also removing the loan contingency. But you still have some type of a non-traditional loan involved that still needs to go through underwriting. And the underwriter on a hard money loan, they can decline that loan. So again, be very careful because you may be jeopardizing your client's deposit. Yes, Chris.
And typical hard money, are they paid like 5, 6, 7 points? How many points are you charging? It depends on the borrower and the lender.
Yeah, so if
Hard money lend loans are cheap right now.
So if you are
1.9%.
using hard money, you can put in additional terms. And where's additional finance terms? Right here, G2. Right here.
Sometimes you'll get a letter of intent from the hard money lender, and you're not gonna get like a pre-approval letter.
Yeah. All right, so this is where I really wanted to focus on with all of the new changes is on the purchase agreement under G3, okay? And then I'm gonna go to paragraph 18 because right now, we don't have to have a buyer representation agreement right now. Come Tuesday the 13th, it is required that you have a buyer representation, a BRBC form, okay? So I want you to get in the habit, and I don't know what this is gonna look like after August 13th. If it's already gonna be set, or you're not gonna have the option to do so or not. Because any type of submission of offer has to have some type of representation, either non or an exclusive agreement with the buyer. Make sense? So it's going to be interesting to see what happens here. But right now, as we speak, when you click G3, it will populate the form SPBB. Okay. This is like your CBC form, which was your cooperating broker compensation. What that form did was it confirmed what the listing agent was paying compensation to a cooperating broker. But it also had information there if it was a non-MLS member or if you wanted to modify the commission. The MLS had 2%, but you're asking for 2.5%. The CBC form was submitted with your offer to ask for 2.5%. Okay. Well, the CBC form is eliminated from zip forms. You will not see it on your zip forms anymore. This is kind of that replacement with the buyer representation agreement, but you're also asking the seller to pay you compensation. Okay. And it's a flat fee or a percentage. So under the SPB form, it's submitted with the offer, with the pre-approval, and all of the other advisory and disclosure as part of the process when submitting it to the listing agent. The listing agent is going to see they're asking for 2.5%, right? Because come August 13, the MLS is removing what? The commission, okay? So now it's going to be part of the negotiations. Any questions on G3? All right. H1 goes into verification of all cash, all right? So attached to the offer or within 3 days, or you can put more or less, okay?
Simon, real quick.
Yes.
Do you want to mention the $2,500 fine if you don't have the buyer broker?
Yeah, please, yeah. So.
Oh, I already get in trouble today. You get yourself in trouble now.
Yeah, I just want you to know that if you don't have that, there's a $2,500 fine.
On the MLS. So be very, very, very careful in how you're interpreting commissions. And here's my take, and Brandon will kind of piggyback from it, from this morning's conversation, is the MLS is going to crack down. They're going to police and enforce it even more with all these changes. And if they feel that there's something there that is against the rules and regulations with all these new changes, they can impose a fine up to or
Minimum.
a minimum of
Yeah,
$2,500.
then they have a 3-strike, you're out rule.
The thing that nobody is talking about that I want to make everybody very much aware of is that in the Association of Realtors, the board of directors there, every member of the board of directors serves on a committee, and they have one person especially assigned to what they call ops. That person is operations committee, and the operations committee works closely with the on MLS violations. So and this is something that's gonna be a big deal when it comes to agreements. I don't serve there anymore. I did for 14 years. And I will tell you that we're gonna see a lot of contracts coming into agreements now. And not because somebody crossed the sign or not because somebody didn't have clear cooperation, but because they don't have this buyer broker agreement. And they're gonna submit that as an MLS violation. The agreements they file against you doesn't have to be a fair housing thing or a code of ethics violation. It could be an MLS violation. And the other thing that you need to know, if someone files a grievance against you, and it is a code of ethics grievance, when it comes to a grievance committee, they have a whole form over here, template, that looks at what your grievance says and sees if there's also an MLS violation attached to that, and the grievance committee can add that to the complaint against you. The grievance committee can add anything that the agent who filed the grievance against you might have missed, whether it's another code of ethics that was broken or if it's an MLS violation. So grievance committees are gonna go from having one hearing a month to probably 5 or 6, I guess.
Yeah, and you've probably seen too, thank you so much, Michelle. You've probably seen on social media, there's a lockbox and there's a little note that says 3%, right? Saying, hey, where seller's offering, 3%. I also saw one that it's an aerial footage of the property on the grass. It had a 3%. Yeah, 3 kilos. I mean, it's ridiculous. Be very careful, The reason is, it's not just you, but it's also the broker too can get involved. I unfortunately was involved in an arbitration. Agent had no bad intentions, none whatsoever. And unfortunately, we had to go through the process because the board, the MLS submitted it to the board, and then the board opened up a case on the agent. And because I was the broker, I was dragged into this. And now my clean, good standing is not so clean anymore. Okay, because now the letter of the letter of good standing, right? If you want to switch to another board or add a secondary.
It's like when your kids get a speeding ticket.
100%, yeah. So now I have, that I had an arbitration hearing, even though I'm still in good standing and in good standing with with my primary for almost 30 years, I still have a ding into my letter of good standing. So just be very careful, because you just never know that. And there's so many different now rules and regulations that it may be this rule or that rule that they can entrap you, and now you have a tarnish in your MLS. Farah and then Joanna.
I had a buyer consultation and he did sign the buyer broker agreement. However, I missed a few boxes. Now to go back, the signature is live because he was there. I was going over the documents with him, but then now I have to go back and check more boxes. Can I do it on the existing documents that I already have in my zip form?
Are you referring to the purchase agreement?
No.
Buyer broker agreement. The
Buyer broker.
compensation, buyer compensation.
Okay, so yeah, so in relations to the compensation or something else?
No, you've already had it signed.
It's already
You
signed.
need to-
But
Yeah,
So once it's signed and agreed, it's set in stone, you're just gonna have to add
modify.
some type of modification or addendum to it.
Just be careful.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, Joanna?
I was just gonna ask you about that grievance. Is that something that you can share with us so that we don't go down that same path? About what that.
I could, but that's gonna be a different conversation that's gonna take me out of today's class, but it was.
Hello,
Yes,
hi, I'm sorry, I'm actually in a class, but I saw your car coming in.
Yeah, she's on the phone.
Well,
All right, so let's.
right.
I like it when they're in the bathroom. That's.
Simon?
Yes,
Yeah, Penny on the chat is asking this question. Will we be required to provide copy of buyer's representation agreement with every offer? Or only when we are asking for buyers, excuse me, for commission?
yeah, good question. So it really depends, it depends on the agent. Some agents, I can tell you, will probably ask for a copy of your buyer representation agreements, and some would not even care. And again, everyone has their thoughts and opinions around it, but someone may say, look, I want to confirm what your agreement you have with your buyer. They may ask as part of the negotiations, right? The seller counteroffer says, please provide us with a copy of your BRBC. And if that's a condition, and if you don't comply with it, the seller may say, well, we're not going to accept your offer, right? So it's one of those scenarios and situations. I can tell you that maybe not much listing agents will probably ask for the copy of that buyer representation agreement, but we'll know more next week how that all plans out, right? Any thoughts, Brandon and Michelle? Your thoughts about that?
I think that most experienced agents are not gonna ask for a copy of it until the offer goes hard and you're gonna open escrow, and then they're gonna want it as part of the compliance for the file, right? So, but I think up to that point, they're gonna take your word for it if you check the box at the time.
I think, Simon, if you're the listing agent and you already have your seller okay with paying it, you won't ask for it.
Correct.
But if your seller isn't paying anything, you're probably gonna want to see.
That's right. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
Very good point. Cool. All right, let me, so yeah, we talked about the $2,500 fine, it's on the MLS, yes. And the Green Fence Committee, also pulled in the broker. Yeah. Yeah, so, the problem with it is if it's an MLS, remember, as a member of the MLS, the broker is also tied to the brokerage and also the agents. Because if you are familiar, you don't have access or the authority to cancel a listing. Only the company does, or the broker, right?
The grievance committee will always know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when there's a violation that involves broker responsibility, they can bring the broker into the mess.
It's A&R.
Yeah, and both the agent and the broker would be responsible, and it's happened. Where we have to pay a fine because not overseen, so.
Do we have any, and this can be another conversation, but do we have any idea what's gonna be changing on E&O as all this?
We don't, but we're gonna be renewing our E&O insurance. We saw a very small spike in claims this year from last year. But right now, for the South Bay office, we're still one of the very lowest.
I meant for violations that are coming.
Good question. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. Yeah. I know we're gonna have a lot of changes regarding what is covered, what is not covered as well. All right, violation for trying to list commissions anywhere on the MLS through code. Yeah, so you gotta be very, very careful. I would say for now, be behind the scenes, don't put anything that says about compensation just because they're gonna police the MLS. And it is a violation and it's gonna cost you a
The
pretty penny.
Department of Justice is also monitoring.
Yeah,
It's
I-
not just NAR and CAR, it's the Department of Justice is where you really, right?
yeah,
I don't know if you saw Mike Delbrett stuff, they have secret shoppers now.
yeah.
It's money grab, man, it's like. It's money grab.
So imagine if the DOJ is pretending to be a consumer, right?
Yeah.
And they're documenting, they're doing all this stuff, so be very, very careful on this. And this is not just in California, this is everywhere, folks, okay? I was talking to our bold instructor yesterday, who's out of Arizona. And he says, we're as confused as everyone else too, But a lot of the alignments of what we're doing, they're doing, I'm assuming that it's across the board. I know Colorado works in a whole different parameter, but you know, everyone needs to be in alignment to be okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. Colorado, they're not requiring a buyer representation.
Yeah, interesting. All right, let's continue. So H2 verification of down payment closing.
Simon?
Yes,
Okay, Robert, on the
Robert, what? Hello?
I think the palm tree is interfering with her.
She muted herself.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, it says in here, Cory is removing the last page of BRBC, which has the buyer's contact info.
Yeah, this is what Brandon was
Yeah.
talking about.
Okay, I didn't hear Brandon.
Yeah, that they're gonna remove the page 5 of the buyer representation agreement. Shamika? Question?
How does this affect negotiating like your referral fee? Is it still standard gonna be like 30 to 35%? Like, or are we able to still negotiate our referral fees then? Cause and if so, how does that work?
Yeah, your referrals are not gonna be impacted because those are agreements is a documentation from one agent to another and a brokerage. Remember, these are between seller, buyers, and agents, not agent to agent referrals. So the component here is that a seller working with a listing agent, right? That listing agent cannot negotiate those terms with a buyer submitting an offer. But it doesn't say anything about referral. So referral is if I'm giving a referral, as an example, to Michelle Brown, I don't know commercial, I'm gonna toss it to her, and she successfully closes the deal. Part of the segue in the requirement is, 20-25%, whatever we agree to, what is fair for her, what is fair for me. That doesn't change the conversation. Per the agreement, it's still allowed. Okay, so that's not part of all of this that's happening with the NAR.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, good questions. All right, so all of it here is just basic verification of cash, down payment, and loan. It's already set at 3. If it's a pre-qualification, pre-approval. Okay, the next is the final verification is basically the VP. It's 5 days prior to close of escrow, right? So within 5 days of closing, the buyer has the right to do a final walkthrough of the property. It's not a condition, but it's just to make sure that the property is still in the same original condition as they originally saw it. And if the buyer requested any repairs, that those repairs were done and completed. If not, then on the VP form, it allows language there to make sure that one, we may be able to extend the time to close if it's something significant, right? Hey, you know what? The things that we agreed to is not done, so it's going to delay. We're going to push. You just want to keep paper trail of all of that, right? So that's where the final verification goes into play. Section K. One second, Chris. Okay. Section K, assignment request. Okay, so these are more for situations where you're working with either an investor, right? Or if your client plans to transfer their interest into their own personal trust or their own corporation or LLC, okay? And I'll explain how that works when we go to 23, because it illustrates the reason behind an assignment. But that assignment also has a stipulation of 17 days after acceptance. So if a buyer gets their offer accepted, within that 17 days, they can say, I'm going to transfer it to my corporation. That's an assignment. I'm assigning my interest to now an entity or a trust. That's considered an assignment. Where it also says, and I'm not going to go too deep into it, where a buyer ties up the property and we hear these wholesalers, right? Now, is it practice? It is. We see a lot of wholesalers tie up the property, find an end user, and now the end user will end up closing it sometimes called double escrows, or, just transferring the interest. I want you to understand and be very careful and cautious this, because the language on there is that an assignment cannot be transferred without the written consent of the seller. Okay, the written consent. Now, the written consent is only if it's someone outside that entity of the buyer's request. LLC, corporation, S Corp, C Corp, or a trust. If that buyer plans to, let's say, give it to Chris as an example, that's a separate entity. It has to be agreed by the seller. And if the seller does not agree to it, then that cannot happen. The seller now can force the cancellation because the buyer is indeed in breach of the contract. Okay, so I want you to understand those elements. All of your answers are on the purchase agreement that says that. All right, and then we'll talk a little bit more on paragraph 23.
So can I just clarify? So assignment request, you said, as long as like if I'm the buyer and I'm transferring it to my corporation or.
So let's go to 23. Let's go to 23 real quick. So paragraph 23. This is why I love this RPA, because I don't have to scramble to find the answer. I just go to that paragraph where it says about assignment.
We just had one signed that the buyer's agent and the offer in small print and the other terms and conditions required. They didn't put an assignee when they, as the buyer, but they asked for half paragraph 23 removed.
Okay.
Negated, and I'm like.
So if that's the case and the seller signs, then it's, then you can transfer it to any entity, any other buyer. If the seller and the listing agent missed it and just sign off on it, removing paragraph 23, then that eliminates all of the language here, folks. So the following says this, all right, and this is where Lily and I had a discussion about the AOAA form with an agent that we were going back and forth. So it says the following: buyer shall have the right to assign all buyer interests in their agreement to buyer's own trust or to a wholly owned entity, a buyer that is in existence at the time of such assignment. Pretty crystal clear, right? I don't see any confusion around this. Buyer shall not assign all of or any part of the buyer interest in this agreement without first having obtained a separate written consent of the seller to a specified assignee. Okay. Such consent shall not be unreasonable withheld prior to any assignment. Buyer shall disclose to the seller the name of the assignee. An assignee means a different person. Okay, not its own entity. So I want to distinguish one from the other, folks. Okay, entity, own entity, corporation, LLC, trust, right? That's my entity. An assignee is someone else that's going to buy it and close it. It's not going to be the buyer, original buyer. Make sense? And it says that the buyer shall disclose that information. Buyer shall provide assignee with all documents related to this agreement, including but not limited to the agreement and any disclosures if assignee is a whole owned entity or trust of the buyer. Okay. Also, the assignee does not need to re-sign all of the initial, re-sign or initial all documents provided, whether or not an assignment requires seller's consent at the time of assignment. Assignee shall deliver a letter from assignee lender that the assignee is pre-qualified or pre-approved as paragraph 6B. Should assignee fail to deliver such a letter, seller, after first giving assignee a notice to perform, shall have the right to terminate the assignment. Buyer shall, within the time specified in paragraph 3K, deliver and request to sign the agreement for seller's consent. Buyer fails to provide that required information with the time frame, seller withholds of consent shall be deemed reasonable, and total or partial assignment shall not be believed buyer or buyer's obligation pursuant to this agreement, unless otherwise agreed by the seller on the AOAA form. Parties shall provide an assignment agreement and escrow within 1 day of the assignment. Okay, pretty crystal clear. Any questions regarding that? Okay, I know Lily, you're laughing because we've had this conversation with a seasoned agent, and he just did not comprehend, and he says, well, I called CAR, they're telling me, no, you have to do the AOA. I says, no, you really don't in this particular scenario, but they ended up sending a notice to perform, and it's like, do we really want to go down that rabbit hole? I says, you know what, just get it signed, pacify the agent, and let's just continue with the process. There's no point in arguing, and now it complicates the scenario even more. So that's just my take. Sometimes you just gotta bend a little bit and just, bite your tongue a little bit and just take your ego out of the way. So any questions regarding assignment, folks? Okay, let me go back to, okay, so
I have one quick question to ask you.
yes.
If for some reason the buyer assigns it to a totally different person, so it goes from me to Farrah. And then in the middle of the process, the seller agrees to it. So now Sarah is the new assignee. So when it comes time to signing off all the contingencies, is Farrah the new person that has to sign off on everything, or I'm assuming it's Farrah since she's now the new assignee?
Yeah, if it's agreed upon by the seller, the new assignee, then the new assignee will be signing because they're taking responsibility. So if something happens, we want to have the person that's actually going to buy the property and close the property.
They're taking over all the terms of the
Yeah.
What if they signed? Oh, okay, that answers my second question. Okay.
All right, so next contingencies. Okay, so section E goes into contingencies. Pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to go too deep into it. They're all pretty much 17 days. Now, the new RPA compared to the old RPA, remember the old RPA, loan contingency was 21 days, right? Thank goodness that they reduced that. That was a long time. If the lender couldn't get their stuff together within 17 days, or 21 days, you probably don't have a good lender, in my opinion. I'm just saying. Okay. Not knocking any lenders, I'm just saying, but now they went back to the original 17 days, right? So what does that mean? Okay, so 17 days of acceptance, right? So the offer gets accepted. It's not when escrow opens, it's when it was accepted. Okay, so if I got accepted today, right, but we don't open escrow till Tuesday, doesn't mean escrow starts and contingency start that time. It starts from the acceptance. Now, acceptance means the day of execution, right, when everyone agrees. But today would be considered 0 days of a 17-day period, calendar days. So tomorrow would be 1, Sunday would be 2, Monday, so on and so forth. If a contingency falls on a weekend or holiday, it reverts to the next calendar days. If it falls during the week, then that's when the seller can send a removal of contingency.
You mean the end date?
Yeah, the end date.
Yeah, it carries through for 17 days no matter
does.
what. Right.
Yeah. So calendar days is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah.
But a contingency falls on a weekend or a holiday, then it reverts to the next calendar day. But close of escrow is still 30 days, 30 calendar days. Okay. All of these contingencies are still all calendar days, just when it falls on a weekend or holiday. Make sense? All right, so and the buyer has the option to remove a loan contingency by checking this off. Okay, that they don't know, maybe they're like the original loan, it's 50% down. They may not need a loan, loan contingency. They're pretty solid that they're going to get their loan approved, right? Or even an appraisal, right? Because they're putting such a substantial amount down that the appraisal doesn't really matter. Okay. Section L goes into the appraisal here. I like this language here because before we had to write the lingo, and in order to offset, if the buyer is still willing to come in to the table, if the appraised value is less than the actual asking price. Remember, this offer was $1 million, but let's say that the offer comes in at $975, then the buyer says to the seller, I'm good. okay, up to 975, meaning that I'll come in with the difference of 25,000 on top of my down payment closing costs. I'll come in with the additional 25 to make this deal work. If the appraisal comes in less than 975 and it comes in at 950, now the buyer and the seller can either negotiate those terms. Okay, meaning the buyer can back out of the deal because the appraised value is less than what they agreed to, or the buyer and the seller can negotiate terms to make it work still, right? Just because the appraisal is less doesn't mean that the buyer and the seller can not come to some type of agreement. And I've seen, very experienced agent be able to navigate these situations when the value is a lot less than the offer. Okay, 3 things can happen, right? Buyer and seller can negotiate. Buyer can come in with the difference. The seller can reduce the price down to it, or both mutually decided cancel. Make sense? Okay. Appraisals are also 17 days. You can also have your buyer, as a way to have a strong offer, release appraisal contingency. Now, bear in mind, folks, okay, I want to be crystal clear because I get this asked many, many times. If you remove the appraisal contingency, right, and it doesn't appraise, you cannot use that as an ammunition saying, well, because it didn't appraise, I'm not going to be able to get the loan. The seller may say, I don't care. That was not the stipulation. They may still be able to go after damages. Okay, so be very, very clear in how you approach that, Brandon.
And you should also be careful now, if you want to use this as an example. So the seller is not offering $25,000 to pay you, and you want to come in with $1,025,000 offer.
That's right.
To cover. Now what do you do here? So that's where you need to have a good conversation, and you need to know your comps, you need to know the situation.
That's right. Yeah, good point. Do you have a question? Okay. All right, so L3 goes into investigation of property, 17 days. This is where a lot of people get confused as the information access to the property. So let's say that the buyer goes all cash, releases all contingencies. Can the buyer release any and all contingencies?
Yes.
Automatically removed from the very beginning and say, look, I want this property, I'm going to tear it down, I can care less. Remove all contingencies, right? So part of that also means that information access, okay? So even though the buyer released any and all contingencies, you still have to allow the buyer the opportunity, and it says here, if they want to see the property. The listing agent and the seller cannot say to the buyer, hey, you released all, there's no need for you cannot see the property. No. Okay, based on this this language here, folks, it says that the buyer right to access the property is for informational purposes, not a contingency. Does not create a cancellation right and applies even if the contingencies are removed. So you cannot tell the buyer they cannot see the property, because most buyers want to go out there to maybe get their contractor, maybe do some type of measurements, whatever the case may be. They have 17 days. After 17 days, then the seller can says, look, you had your time period to do so. Then you can use that as a way not to allow. But you got to play fair, you got to play nice, right? And sometimes it's just best to just go through the motions. The buyer already released all contingencies. They're already potentially jeopardizing their deposit, right? So I'm just thinking from that perspective is, I can care less. If the buyer decides to back out, seller has rights to their deposit. Chris.
I just went through this, I actually put the information on just the property, the same amount of days for our close, but that's for 30.
Yeah.
Because this property was staged by a staging company.
Yeah.
And he had to go in, they had to
That's
wait
right.
until they got all the furniture out to do our final walk.
Yeah. And you as a listing agent can negotiate this and counter and says, look, I know you want 17 days, but I would say on the seller counter offer, section L3, information access shall be 5 days. Okay? 5 days, and if the buyer agrees to it, then you can use that as a process saying, look, after the 17 days, you know, if these numbers are higher or lower, you can use that as an opportunity not to allow the buyer to go in. You've already had your time to do so. All right, and then on the right side, it talks about removal of contingency by checking the CRB. That stands for contingency removal buyer. Okay, you click that, it'll populate the form. Insurance, this is something new that came up. L4 goes into with all the insurance companies leaving the state of California, it's getting harder and harder to get insurance, property insurance. So we encourage our agents and our buyers, you know, get on the process fast immediately to make sure that the property can be insured. But it also has a stipulation of 17 days. Review of seller documents, 17 days to release, remove as a contingency, or 5 days after delivery, whichever is later. So meaning, let's say that the seller gives you the TDS but failed to provide you with the SPQ. And then on the 17th day, they realize, oh gosh, we forgot to give you the seller questionnaire, right? The SPQ. What this language says, folks, is that the buyer has an additional 5 days to review it, even though you're requesting that as a contingency removal. You can use this and say, well, we never got the SPQ seller disclosure. Or if you release that and now the seller provides you with a new form that was not part of it, the buyer still has an additional 5 days to review, investigate, and may have the option to back out of the deal and retain their deposit back, depending on the circumstances and the scenario. Brandon.
I also found out the other day, Simon, that the flipper disclosure form,
That's right.
so it went away and they added it in the SPQ.
Got it.
Just
Okay. Yeah.
So,
So if you're not aware about the flipper, it was a form that was populated this past July. And if you're working with investors, part of the segue is that if it's a flip property, they have to divulge the information of the contractor, any reports, blueprints, permits, all of that nature as part of the process. There's just been so many lawsuits against that. So review of seller, preliminary title report, 17 days, common interest, review of leases, and all that fun stuff. L9 goes into COP. That's if the seller of the buyer property is a condition that they need to sell their property in order to utilize the proceeds to purchase their uplake property, which is the offer they're making. So if that's the case, I would encourage you, please make sure that you understand, because it's there's a lot of moving parts when it's a transaction. You're the listing agent, you get an offer, that buyer has to sell their property as a condition, but your client now is on purchasing another property. There's a lot of moving parts, right? So you got to be in constant communications, and it can be very, very, very stressful. And I've seen scenarios where agents just lose it and they're stressed. And then I come in and try to navigate it, and it's not easy. You know, sometimes agents get checked out because there's just too much pressure, and they're going to cancel. And that cancellation now would ultimately cancel yours. So it's a big mess. You know, for me, is the way I think is get through one and then start looking for your home, because you have the money in your bank account. But sometimes they may just be driving, see a home, pulls hits, I want this property, but they got to sell their home. You have no choice but to navigate it. This is why you get paid good money to do what you do. It's stressful and it's not sometimes fun. It's never as smooth as you think. So any questions regarding that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Going back to the flipper information.
Yeah.
How much work is considered a flip?
Any improvements to the home in the last 18 months?
Yeah. So yeah, any improvements whatsoever in the past 18 months. You have a good part of the store repainted. Yep. You have to disclose. Yep.
Yeah.
Removal of dead bodies, whatever it is.
Isn't that it's just owned for less than 18?
Yes, it doesn't have to be a flip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they changed, that's why they got rid of that form, Brian, because there's so many sellers now doing remodels. Yeah. And there are a lot of, and Simon did really allude to that on the financing side. There are a lot of people who are flipping using primary financing to get conventional financing on the deal, and they have no intention of living in the property whatsoever, so.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I should put the car.
I have a list.
It's recorded.
Yeah.
All right, so possession. The purchase agreement already says at the time of recording, meaning so when it records by 6 p.m., that's when you transfer keys to the buyers. Okay. If there's any other modification, and maybe having a conversation with the listing agent saying that the seller needs extra time, then you're going to populate another form giving them, or you can put here, look, I've already talked to the listing agent. I know that the seller needs 3 days, 4 days. Then you could specify it here as well. Seller occupying or vacant unit, that goes into your SIP form or your RLAS. Anything less than 29 days, you'll use the seller in possession. Anything over 29 days, then you would use the RLAS form, all right? So pretty clear, 29 or less, 30 or more. If it's a tenant occupied, then you would check that, obviously, if the tenant is staying in possession. Seller shall disclose if an occupied by anyone other than the seller, and the attached TOPA form to this. Documents and compliance, time for performance, seller's delivery of documents, 7 days. Sign and return escrow. Okay, so if someone wants to back out of the deal, if you understand all of these components, then there's way to maneuver this. If the buyer wants to back out, just because they have a change in heart, doesn't excuse the buyer from backing out of the deal. But if you know loopholes and what you can, then that's the way to back out of the deal. Keep it as clean, as professional, because then that'll tie up the opportunity for the buyer to get their money back and their deposit if they find another property, right? So this is why we encourage our agents to really understand your client's needs and wants, so you're not wasting time if that's not the right property, okay? These are why we have these conditions in place. Buyer and seller will initial. Next page goes into the items included and excluded, okay? Look at the MLS, talk to the agent, look at agent remarks, and find out what is staying or what the buyer is requesting, right? Just because you check the stove or refrigerator, wine, washer and dryer doesn't mean that's staying with the property. It's a condition that the buyer is offering, but the seller and the listing agent can counter that. Make sure, because if you don't counter and this is checked, buyer's agent's mindset says all of these items are staying. And they can use that as a tool saying, you know, we agreed to it, the seller's down in breach of contract. So make sure you're checking all of this stuff, what is staying and what's not staying. Also, if the seller wants to take something because it's high-end or very expensive, or it may be personal, then I would say get it removed before you even put the property on the market and have a replacement, okay? Because maybe you have a $5,000 refrigerator that you touch and it has songs and it does your coffee. You may not want that as part of the agreement. Maybe you want it out before you even put it on the market. So
Essentially, we just got an offer like this with all of the boxes checked and the
Yeah.
house has been gutted.
I love that. Obviously, they saw that.
yeah.
They want the security system and the cameras and the doorbell and all of the appliances, including the wine fridge and
Wow.
remember that was Ladera?
Yeah.
Are you
See,
kidding
what
me?
happens a lot is the buyer agents use the same form when making other offers, and they think not to check and not pay attention, folks. This is why, please be careful, because in the eyes of a listing agent, when I see that, I'm gonna scratch my head. Do I really want to work with this particular agent that obviously doesn't see all of this information, right? So to your point, Michelle, you're 100% right. So Chris.
What I'm seeing now, and I'm gonna start doing it now, when you do virtual staging, you put a refrigerator in there.
Yeah.
You have to stay in there.
Yes.
Virtually staged refrigerator does not come, that is not real, it's not.
It's like, this virtual 3% co-broke fee does not exist.
Yeah. Items. Any additional items that your client is asking, then you can put it here, click here, add here. Anything excluding, then you would put here. Allocation of cost, pretty
Can I say
self-explanatory.
one thing?
Yes.
You have to, where it says anything excluded, for whatever. Oh, I almost said something I shouldn't say, for whatever reason. There's a default on this where the bathroom mirrors are automatically checked,
Yeah.
That's right.
and I don't know why. So you have to write in there that there are no bathroom mirrors at your place.
Right.
Thank you for reminding me, because
It's a default. It's
I think it's an error, and I guess the reason is because sellers have removed mirrors and left it just a wall. So I think they use this as a default, so.
I took all the appliances, but I left my ex wife. You gotta deal with that.
All right, Chief goes into allocation of cost, pretty self-explanatory, natural hazard disclosures. Typically, the seller pays. Now, I left this for educational purposes because I've seen where it offers and it has click here for additional reports, click here for, the way you remove it is click it and then come up and it removes that, all right? Don't leave it in there, it looks unprofessional. So if the property doesn't fall under this wildfire disclosure, click it, move out, and it clears it, okay? I've seen it, it just like, it confuses people, are they asking?
Right.
So.
I keep clicking it.
Yeah, and it also goes with the NHD too, you know, you have different vendors that you can put. Make sure that you're, looking at all this information. If the client and you are requesting environmental, then you click on it, okay? These are for any reports that the buyer is requesting or willing to do. The less, the best, in my opinion, because remember, the lender gets a copy of this and this can flag the underwriter. And the underwriter may use that as a condition, and it's like, why did I put that information? Like termites, termites are part of negotiations. They're not like the original RPA. Remember, we used to have section 1, section 2. So I would leave it, because once you put termite here, the underwriter may ask for a report of that termite.
So if you negotiated outside of this document, where would you put it?
Request for repairs.
I see.
Yeah. All right, smoke detectors, who's gonna pay for smoke? Government required point of sales, inspection reports, and then point of sale correction. So this is again like certain cities like Compton, city of Los Angeles, Gardena, have city inspections, meaning that they go, Lawndale's one. So if you're asking the seller, and sometimes the sellers will counter these out, they don't want, please waive that. But if the seller is going to take care of this, then, and when explaining it to the buyer, is these are, city conditions that they may ask for, the city may ask for an inspection, and then any red flags on that inspection, who's going to correct those?
And our point of sale, we had one in part of Oakland, and it's a historic district, and the
That's
seller
right.
has to replace the sewer lateral in front of their property line
That's right.
for the width of their property, and that's a public utilities, that's not a private plumbing.
Right,
But it's a point of sale contingency that got passed in San Francisco,
yeah,
and that's a $6,000 job.
yeah, good point, Michelle, thank you. Escrow fees, who's gonna pay for escrow? Both. I typically would say each should pay their own fees, seller's choice of service. Or if you know the escrow company, or you can even ask to see if we can have the opportunity to retain escrow. Maybe it's an out in area listing agent that doesn't know, and we want to work with the buyer here. Then it doesn't hurt to ask, right? Everything is negotiable. Owner's title, seller's choice, buyer's lender, tied insurance policy, county, city, if there's an HOA, who's going to be paying for that? Any other additional fees that the buyer or seller is requesting, they can put it on here. Again, I wouldn't recommend it, just leave it blank. Home warranty, if there's any specifics such as, pool coverage, then you would put it here. The amounts, and then you can check which company, if any, right? As an example, who's gonna pay for it, or the buyer has the right to waive it. Additional terms, this is where you can add any other terms that the buyer or the agents are requiring, you can put it here in additional terms. The next is the advisory. If it doesn't pertain, then you leave it blank. Again, it's pretty self-explanatory. It already checks the BIA, the wire fraud, fair housing, and then the Consumer Practice Act. I would leave all the other stuff blank, only if it's a short sale. The statewide buyer, it's already part of the seller disclosure, so I would check that. That's just additional more forms. And sometimes I've seen on the MLS where the agent says, only the offer. Okay, don't include all the other wazoo forms until we're into escrow, right? Because the listing agent doesn't want to go through all the forms. Follow directions, okay, it's best practice in my opinion. Okay, any other forms? Now we go into the definitions of a lot of the components of the offer. I'm not going to go much into it. It's pretty self-explanatory. Here's my point. Okay, read the contracts, read the contract, read the contract. Okay. The beauty of this form is that on a specific grid, it has the paragraph if you want to know more about what the natural hazard. So your answer and your question is there. All right. This talks about the deposit. We talked about the initial deposit and increased deposit. The retention of deposit. Paragraph 26 says if initial by all parties otherwise incorporated in this agreement, buyer default, buyer and seller advised to consult with a qualified real estate attorney before adding any clause or specifics. So try to not add all these additional language on there because it may just alter and put you in a very particular situation. Goes into all cash. What is all cash, right? If an all cash offer is specified, no loan is needed to purchase the property. This agreement is not contingent on buyer obtaining the loan. Buyer shall, within the time specified, deliver written verification of proof of funds. Okay, pretty self-explanatory. Goes into the loans, the balance of the purchase. Again, part one and part two, what the buyer is bringing into the table. Limit of credit to buyer. Not going to go too much into details on that. Verification, not going to go. Buyer statement of finance, again, is pretty self-explanatory. Occupancy, we talked about that. Seller remaining in possession, we talked about it. Contingencies and removal. Here it goes about a little bit more like on the 14B paragraph of contingency and cancellation rights. This is contingency regarding loan, appraisal, no appraisal contingency, investigations, review of seller documents. If it's a condominium, buyer review of leases. This is if it's solar panels, water filtration, stuff of that nature. J goes into removal of contingency and cancellations. Okay, remember before a cancellation can happen, a notice of performance must be implemented and provided. The buyer or the seller have 48 hours to remedy that contingency. Otherwise, either party has the right to cancel. Right, so it goes into that language. Items included, again, what is considered real property or personal property. Get clear and understand, right? As an example, the sign to my right and to your left, that would be considered personal, right? Because I can pull that frame and take it with me. But the walls and the lighting is considered real property, right? So it goes into the understanding what stays and what doesn't stay. And if something does, if the seller does want to remove, then remove it or put it in writing that that particular sign or whatever is going to be removed as part of the agreement. Items included, allocation of costs, we went to it, point of sale requirements. Again, these are for your city requirements and any inspection, who's going to pay, who's responsible. We talked about home warranty. Now the statutory of disclosures, SPQ, TDS, all of the fund disclosures as part of the language here. Lead disclosure, lead disclosure. I was going to say leadership. What forms is again part of the process. If the home was built prior to 1978, then that's a requirement of lead-based paint, fire hardening only if the property, how do you find out, is through the NHD form, and then goes into the requirements under that. Waiver is prohibited, so the lead base in certain conditions, disclosures are not considered waived. They're part and incorporated as part of it. G goes into determination rights, part of the process of disclosures and all that fun stuff of space compliance. And these are more like in the hilly areas, like PD probably has them out in the San Gabriel, the valley, then it goes into the language of that. Tax withholding, I'm not going to go too much into Megan's law. If the buyer is inquiring if there's any sex offenders, here's the website that discloses that. Because they may ask you, hey, Simon, do you know of any crime here? Well, there's crime everywhere. Look at social media. You'll find crime everywhere, from your high-end, areas to your low ends. Crime is everywhere. So part of the same way is that they are interested. You can always direct them to a site. I know crimestoppers.com. They can see, what crimes have been reported as part of disclosures. All of these are just kind of disclosures. I'm not going to go into it. Buyer investigations, again, the buyer has the time to do their due diligence. I'm not going to go into it, but I encourage you to please read. Title investing, how buyers going to take title, investings. And then 14A and B goes into the time periods of contingency and right to cancel. Within their contingency rights, if the buyer decides to back out, the seller cannot stop that. If they're within their rights to cancel, the buyer has the right to cancel and vice versa. So it goes into the explanation of it, seller's right to cancel, buyer's right to cancel, right? And then the effectives of removal of contingency. These several paragraphs, I would definitely encourage you to really read, because there's a lot of language in there that speaks of the right way of doing it and the wrong way of doing it. There's also language in there that says under no good faith, if the seller does not allow the cancellation, that the buyer may seek damages up to $1,000 for not allowing the cancellation. We talked about the verification of final walkthrough, broker and agent's duty for compensation. Okay, and it talks about the SPV form, scope of duties, what you do, what you don't do. Remember, you're a real estate agent. Your job is to sell. Your job is not to wear a hard hat, go up on the roof or under the house and do all these inspections. The instructions of escrow, what the escrow's instructions are. Selections of providers. Remember, buyers can choose whatever inspections they want to do. It's not just a home inspection. There's a form that allows the buyer to do any and all. Sewer, electrical, roof, foundation. Within their time frame, they can do as many inspections. Goes into the MLS. I'm not going to go too much into it. It's pretty self-explanatory. We talked about 23, equal housing opportunities. And then I would also encourage you the importance of definitions. I've actually had conversations in the past of what is acceptance, what is an agent, what's an agreement, as is, and all the fun stuff. I would definitely encourage you all to please read the definition. 26, 27, and 28 go into the liquidated damage provision that the seller may be able to retain up to 3% of buyer's deposit. Anything over 3%, if not in writing, would have to be returned to the buyer. And then it's under a certain condition. If the buyer is buying the property as their own property and it's a single family residence, then they can only retain up to 3%. Mediation is pretty self-explanatory. If there's any disputes between the buyer and the seller, we cannot come to an agreement. You can always encourage mediation. You can go to the website, consumermediation.org, and both the buyer and seller can appoint a mediator and try to mediate and diffuse and hopefully come to an end conclusion to it. Arbitration dispute, if there's no meeting of the mind after doing a mediation, then an arbitration dispute can be done, which is a lot cheaper than getting an attorney, trying to sue one another. Follow the rules and regulations when it comes to arbitration. And arbitration is no different than going to a court, you know, there's an arbitrator, will hear both sides, your opening statement, your cross-examination, and your final conclusion of why you feel whatever the issue is. That's where an arbitration will come into play. Fair appraisal notice, again, that if there's anything fraudulent, you can also call and file, no difference than real estate agents, you know, they can file a complaint against you, but appraisals as well. Terms and condition of the offer, everything incorporated into this based on the initial signature is part of the process, time of essence. Everyone should know that all of the form is time of the essence, right? That's why we have conditions in place. Times like, you know, 17 days to do this, 17 days to do that. This is intended to be blank for the purpose because they may in December add more language. So they left this on blank. Expirations, we talked about expirations. If it is an entity, then you would click here, then it populates the RCSD form, okay? If there's any legal authorization signers, then you would add the additional signers. When you click here, it opens these windows. Then the buyer will sign. If there's more than 2 signers, then you'll include the ASA form. And then if your offer gets accepted, then the seller either will check seller counteroffer, backup offer addendum, entity sellers, so on and so forth. The seller will sign if they do accept it, okay, as part of the segue. So offer not accepted. If the seller does not accept your offer, the seller can initial. No counter offer is being made. The offer was not accepted. Date it. You only have to provide the last page of it. You don't have to send the whole RPA. Just send this page saying, unfortunately, your offer was not accepted by the seller. Here's the receipt and proof that the seller initial and dated. Okay.
Sending that card instead of an email saying, sorry, your offer was not accepted.
Always, I would recommend, you know, does everyone practice? No. I mean, an email will suffice.
Right.
But there may be someone that may say, look, they're by the book. I need a copy of the rejection offer. So the last page of the RPA goes into the sector of, you know, who are the, and this is more for escrow. Escrow needs to know what information, because all of the information of the agents will be in here. And the last is the acknowledgement. They have to stamp and seal this information. And then the presented of offers, all right? Seller, brokerage firm presented the offer. Even though it wasn't accepted, you know, the buyer may, and the buyer agent may ask, hey, I just want to confirm that the offer was accepted, not necessarily rejected, but they want confirmation that it was accepted. All right, and that concludes our RPA class. Any questions? All right. Thank you. Shamika,